So good evening, everybody, and thank you for joining us on tonight's Wildlife Exchange session. We're really pleased to have you all here. And we've been running these, as Iona said, for a couple of years now, and it's fabulous that we're able to update you tonight on what we're doing on the estate and with all our species work as well. We've got a lot to update you on, not least of all our conservation master plan and how all our work fits in with what we're doing. First of all, a bit of an introduction. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Helen and I'm the zoo's field programme manager for the UK and our site ecology as well. So basically anything native species on or off the zoo site is my area of work. I'm very, very lucky. This evening, as Iona said, you'll also be hearing from the rest of my team. So that's Andy Jennings-Giles. Andy is our biodiversity plan coordinator. I've also got Joanne Dooling for you tonight as well, who's our Green Challenge Recovery Fund ecologist, and Ben Harris too, who's our Green Challenge Recovery Fund Habitat Creation Coordinator. And then we've got Chloe as well from Record, who are one of our major partners, which we'll come on to that as well. So we've got a lot of us speaking tonight, which hopefully should keep it interesting for you, and we're going to jump around. So with that, let's get started. You last heard from us actually back in November 2020, I think it was. There's been a huge amount that's changed since then, all good. So I'm going to run through a few bits and bobs now for you and give you a bit of an overview as to where we're at with the estate and our native species work and what's going on. So if you've got any questions, hang fire to them and hopefully we will come to them at the end. Just as a bit of an overview, and for those that you don't know, Chester Zoo's work in UK conservation has been going for about 20 years now, a bit longer than that actually. And our work and our reach is global. We do direct work such as breeding and returning species into the wild, whether that's butterflies or rhinos. And we also work with partner organisations as well, so funding partners to do essential work on the ground. It could be in situ conservation work, programmes in different countries, or it could be something like our massive sustainable palm oil campaign. Working with partners is a big way we can prevent extinction, and this is our mission and what we all work towards. Within our work in the UK, our focus is just as important as it is the work we do globally as well, which is fantastic. And so why the UK? That's obviously not an unusual question to most of us here, but some people are surprised to hear that we do conservation work in the UK. And hopefully here I am speaking to the converted, and most of you are well aware of the situation that we're in the UK in terms of the biodiversity crisis. So these stats here are from the State of Nature report that was released back in 2019. And as you can see, it's not looking good for UK species, hence the need for us to be working right here in the UK to prevent extinction. Up to 15% of species are actually threatened with extinction in the UK, and that stat actually is probably a little bit outdated now. It's probably sadly gone up since then. So the pressures are massive and there's an awful lot of work to do. I'd also recommend, just in terms of background read on the UK situation, to take a look at something called the Lawton Review, which was released in 2010. It seems like quite a long time ago now, actually, and sadly, it's still really relevant. And that review stated that all our wildlife areas and the work that we're doing need to be bigger, better and more joined up as well. So the data is out there in terms of biodiversity in the UK and the fact that it's in decline. And this for us, in terms of Chester Zoo, means that conservation literally starts at home. Over the last 20 years, the zoo's been doing a huge amount of native species work. And we've been doing everything from translocating pine martens from Scotland to Wales to re-establish a population there, using the skills from our keeper team. We're also still got ongoing projects at the minute, such as our large heath butterfly. We're rearing that species on site, working with Lancashire Wildlife Trust to release them onto our Manchester mossland sites in the northwest. So we've got projects dating back 20 years, but it's not just animals, it's plants as well. I've been working with black poplars for 20 years and still propagating those. So it's across the board in terms of our conservation work that we do. One of the biggest developments since I last was able to speak to you all is that we've actually now published our conservation master plan, which all our work sits under, and that's where our focus lies. You can find this on our website, so do please go and take a look and have a read. It gives a really good overview as to our conservation work and the direction that we as Chester Zoo are going in. We've got this unique combination in terms of us as an organisation and as a charity. We've got our living collections that we have. We've got millions of visitors each year, so a fantastic audience to engage with and educate. And we've got real genuine scientific support as well in-house with our team of scientists. So we've got a huge amount of wide-ranging skills that can be harnessed to make a substantial contribution to the work that needs to be done towards our mission of preventing extinction and working towards those biodiversity targets in the UK. So within the plan, we've got various areas that have been set out. In the document you can go and take a look at online. There's some case studies as well, and we've got UK state case studies in there. One of the key areas that we're focusing on is working across landscapes. You'll see that we're also focusing on working on populations and people and policy areas as well. So one of the biggest campaigns which I've mentioned, which is our sustainable palm oil campaign, we're now actually building up and working on quite a lot of other UK policy areas as well. So watch that space on this one. So connecting all of these dots together, if you like, is what we're working towards. Most conservation challenges are really complex, as you know, and dynamic, and it's a lot of these project areas blend together as well. So for example, we've got landscape and places, but also species are intrinsically linked in that. So the landscapes that we're working in, we're covering rare species as well and threatened populations, which is where our estate comes in as well. So the field projects team that we're involved in and the work we do directly contributes now to our master plan and what we are delivering out on the ground. So as well as UK field project partners that we work with, such as Wildlife Trust, we're also doing quite a lot on our estate, and our estate forms one of our flagship landscape areas that we're working on, and that's what we're here to talk about tonight. The creation of our nature reserve started back in 2013, and it was the starting point of really making genuine habitat improvements for us on our own land that we own, and making those benefits for the species and the habitats that we've got here on site, but also contribution into the Cheshire region as well, our local area. We're actually now managing all of our northern corridor on the estate, specifically for biodiversity, and we've entered other areas of our land into countryside stewardship as well. So we've actually gone from this small sort of 5-hectare estate to about 40 hectares that we're now working on, a bit more actually when we add in all our hedgerows that we've got on our ponds as well. So it's quite a vast area. We're just finalising our zoo-wide biodiversity plan, which Andy will tell you a little bit more about shortly. And that focuses on the estate, but also our links with the surrounding green and blue infrastructure. And the plan aims to integrate a lot of varied activities that we've got on the estate as well. So we've got the aim of providing sustainable management that benefits biodiversity, but that also supports the zoo's operational needs, because we've got a huge site to run as well. So Andy's going to go into a little bit more detail on the estate for you shortly in the biodiversity plan. But I also just wanted to give you another overview of one of our major projects, and that's where Joe and Ben's work comes in. So we've launched a major project this last year. As part of our target on focusing on landscapes and places, we've got our nature recovery corridor. These were set up and were a key feature in the government's 25-year environment plan. So last year, we applied to the Green Challenge Recovery Fund to deliver a nature recovery corridor for this region, and we were successful, which was fantastic. So we were awarded about 84% of a £1.2 million grant. So we've funded the rest of that money as well. And the point of that is to try and deliver this first phase of this nature recovery corridor for our region. So you can just see on the plan there, the first area that we're focused on is the area just shown by the dashed line. There's many threats, as we said, to UK biodiversity, and while tackling them obviously is interlinked, what we're trying to focus on through this project is that connectivity aspect of habitats and through the landscape, and also the human and wildlife side, and that sort of area where people overlap as well. And despite the call in that Lawton review for connecting up landscape, 41% of the UK species have still declined since the 1970s. So habitat connection is a really important thing to be able to contribute towards, so that species can move between areas, that they've got food and shelter, and that they can breed successfully. And by working with partners, we hope to deliver this project. It's a massive collaboration. It's not just us at Chester Zoo, but also working with Chester West in Chester, so our local council, the Land Trust, Sustrans, the Canal and Rivers Trust, and we've got some community involvement as well with Cheshire West communities together to try and achieve this. The Nature Recovery Corridor project brings together work for us on our populations aspect, places for wildlife and people, and also we want to make that significant contribution to be able to deliver the targets we've set ourselves in our conservation master plan. A key component of this corridor and this project is what we're doing right here as well, in our own backyard. So the northern corridor of our estate is what borders up to the Shropshire Canal in the north, and Andy's going to tell you about this in a second. The Green Challenge Recovery Fund project enabled us to secure 2 new posts as well, and they'll be focusing on the habitat creation works on our estate, but also crucially they're going to be carrying out a huge amount of biodiversity and survey work, building on existing knowledge that Record have helped us to develop over the last few years, and that's so we can understand what species we've got, how better to make any good habitat changes for them, and what we need to manage. So before we get into that detail, I'm going to pass you over to Andrew Jennings-Giles, who is our biodiversity plan coordinator, and Andy's going to give you more detail on our estate and the habitats and species that we've got there.
Okay, thank you very much, Helen. Thank you everyone for coming tonight. So as I say, I'm going to be talking, just click onto the next slide now. Okay, everyone can see that. So yeah, so I'm Andy, the Zoo Biodiversity Plan Coordinator. So this is a new role for the site. So this is going to be looking at the plan for the entire zoo estate for the next sort of 10-20 years, looking at nature-friendly farming and looking at managing habitats and species for local wildlife, and also working with the zoo as the existing site as well. So it's not just the main core zoo, but also all the wider land we own as well. So this is just an overview of the zoo site altogether. So everything in the red line is everything that we own, which is 236 hectares. So it's quite a big area, so it's roughly 4 to 5 times the size of the purple area, which is the main core zoo that you might know. So also on this map as well, we've got the nature reserve, which is this area over here with some of the reed bed over there as well. And to the north here, we've got the Shropshire Union Canal, which is the top of this yellow section. And then the yellow area itself is actually a local wildlife site for the Shropshire Union Canal. So this is an area that's been identified by the council as an area with a site of biological importance. So lots of good quality habitats along there. It's got lots of nice wet grassland, reed bed, some really nice habitats along there, and some rare invertebrates and rare birds nesting and some interesting plants as well. So just to the left of us, just to the west of us, we've got the A41, just over here. And to the east of us, we've got Worthing and the M53 up here in the corner here. So yeah, as I say, this is the core zoo. And then a lot of our land is actually previous farmland. So we've bought up different farms over the years. Some of that you'll know is the car parking areas to the west of the site. And then to the east of the site, we've got a lot of traditionally farmland fields with small areas of woodland in there as well. And then really good connectivity of hedgerows. Yeah, as I say, we've got lots of species across the site. So lots of nesting birds, you know, a huge variety of dragonflies, damselflies, all sorts of things as well. And as I say, the biodiversity plan is about collecting information. So we're doing a lot of survey work, which Ben and Joe will talk about as well. And through all that survey work, we're working out the best ways to manage the habitats on site. There's also, as I say, there's areas of farmland. So some of that's grassland, and some of it's, we've now got browse plantations as well, which are willow plantations. So a lot of that's to feed our hoof stock in the main zoo, to feed all our wonderful animals in the collection. So that's a bit more sustainable than going out and collecting it from other areas. As I say, also the farmland, we're going to work with the farmers over the next few years to try and make it a bit more wildlife friendly farming. So on to the next slide. So just wanted to show you a few of the things I've spotted recently, like in the last couple of years when we've been going around the site, just doing other surveys. So as I say, we've got all the wonderful animals and plants in our collection, but we've also got a lot of brilliant native wildlife around the site as well. So it's great for butterflies and dragonflies and bees. This picture here of the bee orchid was literally growing right outside our office on the grassland there, which is really lovely grassland. So we've done things like moth trapping at night as well. There's a huge selection of moths. Down in the reed bed, we've got things like willow warblers, sedge warblers, reed bunting. We quite often, when we do nighttime searches for great crested newts on the island site, and we quite often come across hedgehogs. There seems to be a good population of hedgehogs within the main zoo perimeter fence, which is really nice. And as I say, loads of things like fungi across the site, nice wildflowers, things like snipe down in the wet grassland as well. So just gives you a taste there of all the different wildlife you see. And we'd really like people to get involved by recording what you can. So if you're out in the zoo or out in the nature reserve or any of the land, if you see any UK native wildlife, please record it and send it to Record, the local record centre, enter onto their Swift system, or just give one of us a bell, send us an email and tell us what you've seen, because all of that information is really vital for them working out how to manage the habitats on site and for keeping track of wild populations here. So let's talk a little bit about hedgerows. So we've got a huge hedgerow resource on site. We've got over 26 kilometres of hedgerows. Some of those, the ones in yellow are just hedgerows of varying species, and then the ones in orange there on that map have got trees in as well. So it is a landscape character feature for the area to have hedgerow with trees, and trees also add a lot of biodiversity to the hedgerow habitats. So you can see these as like the main connections in a really good network of connectivity across the site. So the hedgerows are really important for birds nesting, as you well know, and for insects. There's lots of berries and nuts in those as well, and also great for like small mammals moving between the fields as well. So they are really vital connectivity, and we're trying to do a lot of work to increase that connectivity by restoring different hedges. So you'll see in this blue area here, we've just put in about 250 metres of hedgerow there through farm stewardship just this winter. So that's connected up an area where the hedgerow had been lost. And then down here near our nature reserve, in the recent months, our zoo expedition, we're doing some hedge laying there. So I'll talk about more about hedge laying a little bit later, but that was restoring the hedge down there as well. And we're also gapping up hedgerows, we're adding new species to them, and laying or coppicing them, which just rejuvenates them as well. So just looking at some of our hedges on site here. So top left there is some of these, we're looking for really tall bushy hedges. So these have got different species, so blackthorn, hawthorn, things like field maple and hazel in there, and wild rose. So good number of different species producing lots of different berries and nuts. Allowing them to be bigger means that they more opportunities for birds to nest, and we're trying to have a variety of heights across the estate, because some birds like lower hedges and some birds like to nest in taller, wider hedges as well. In the top here, we've got blackthorn growing out, which means you get these big thickets of blackthorn, and that's really nice for just invertebrates and for different species of birds in there as well. We're trying to move to cutting all our hedges on a 3-year rotation. So only lots of farms actually cut them every single year, but that's not great, because then you don't get much of the blossom or berries then. By cutting them on a 3-year rotation, you get way more growth of say berries and flowers. So that's really great for the pollinators and for the birds and for the small mammals as well. This is us planting some recently, and we've also been laying them. So that just means that Ben will talk a bit more about this, but it rejuvenates the hedge and it makes it stock proof as well, and it can make it bigger and bushier in the long term. So we've got a lot of ponds on site as well. So you'll all know, if you've gone to the main part of the zoo, how many different ponds and canals we've got. But actually on the wider estate outside the main zoo, we've also got another 30 ponds, which is quite a lot, and they're all quite close to each other. So that's really good for things like great crested newts to move between them, and for lots of the pond beetles and insects which can fly between the ponds, and the pond plants as well. And we've created 4 new ponds in the last 5 years, so that's excellent work. Helen's done a lot of work on that as well. And we've been doing habitat improvement works to a lot of them. So some of them we're trying to open up the south side to let more light in, and that just means that it's better for great crested newts, and it gets to bring more heat into the pond as well. But we're trying to get a sort of all different types of pond across the estate, and we're creating more all the time as well. And because of the main core zoo, and because of all the canals and all the water features you see in all the different enclosures, you basically find that we've got way more ponds per square kilometre than a lot of the surrounding area. So the zoo has been really good for water bodies. And this is just an example of some of the different ponds on site. So you've got things like newly created ponds with bare margins. This is the Islands Canal, where we're looking for great crested newts, and it is incredibly good for great crested newts. It's got nice clear water, lots of submerged vegetation. They really love it in there, and we've got thousands of thousands across the zoo estate. So it really is one of the biggest great crested newt populations in Cheshire. We've got ponds also that are near the growing, so lots of plants are growing around the edges and lots of trees around the edges, and it's quite shaded, but actually that can support certain rare pond invertebrates and certain other creatures around the edge, and certain plants actually like shaded ponds. So we're trying to maintain everything from brand new open ponds all the way through to mid-level ponds that look like this one in the bottom left that looks more like a sort of standard Cheshire pond, to deeper ponds with lilies, to ones that have got trees around the edge, and that just means you get a big diversity of life across the estate. In terms of woodland, we've only got a couple of couple of larger woodlands, and then we've got lots of different scattered woodlands across the actual estate as well as in the main zoo. And what we're trying to do with those is we're going to be thinning some of them out a little bit to let more light in. So that helps with ground flora. So a lot of the woodland flowers want a bit more light in there, things like celandines and bluebells. And Helen's done a lot of work with teams to put up a lot of bat boxes across the woodlands as well. So that's really helping a lot of bird and bat boxes. And we're actually planting out some new areas of woodland next to adjacent blocks of woodlands and basically let them expand out a little bit. And that's really good for carbon retention as well, but really good for woodland wildlife as well. And we're also we're going to be coppicing some areas, which is where you're cutting tubes of things like hazel and then letting them sprout up again. And then you can use the products then for things like hedge laying materials or like weaving into fence panels and things like that. But it also, again, that allows the light into the woodland floor. And finally, my last slide. So we're entering into a lot of environmental land management schemes. So we're doing mid-level stewardship at the moment. So that's working with our tenant farmers on some of our land. So we're particularly like leaving areas of fields completely alone, so the grass can grow along there and the hedges can grow out. We're also in the future hopefully going to have some more cover crops for birds to eat the seeds over winter. So this is an example of a cover crop, the bottom left here. And we've got, so the finches really love those as well. And we're hoping eventually to trap things back like tree sparrows as well to the estate. And some of these cover crops are really good for pollinators as well in the summer. So for the local bee populations and invertebrate populations, they're really good as well. And this map just up here shows some of our new stewardship options. So we've got things like permanent grassland with low inputs. So there's very little spraying in those areas. We're taking areas out of management completely, and we're also doing buffer strips towards the edges of hedgerows around crops as well. All of those things are really beneficial to small mammal populations, invertebrates, and generally help wildlife to live on, basically making it more of an environmentally friendly farm, really. So we're going to watch this space really on that one. And there's actually some new there's some new environmental land management schemes coming in, such as the Sustainable Farming Incentive, and the Local Nature Recovery Scheme. So hopefully we'll be entering into more of those in the future, trying to make the estate a bit more, even more valuable for wildlife than it is already. Okay, that's everything from me for the moment. So I'm just going to share this with Ben now.
Thank you very much, Andy. Right. Lovely to meet you all. My name is Ben. I am the habitat guy here at Chester Zoo. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we want to achieve in terms of our habitat on site and how that relates to the Nature Recovery Corridor. So first, I want to take a look at what habitat we've already got on the estate. So this image will look familiar to you. So thank you, Andy, for outlining the zoo estate and the areas that we manage there. But if you're a little bit lost, my mouse cursor is where some of you have probably parked before. That's the zoo car park there. Okay, so use that to orientate yourself around this image. So we have a little bit of reed bed on site. Now, we're not going to get breeding bitten in a reed bed of this size. It is a very small strip, just 4 or 5 acres, wedged in between a hedgerow and the canal there. But reed bed nonetheless, and it's still valuable to a number of species, birds that use it for breeding, but also invertebrates and plants as well that prefer sort of wetter types of habitat. We've got a couple of stands of woodland. Right here is our sort of native broadleafed woodland. And just above it, we have a sort of conifer plantation. And although they aren't native species there, it still provides a lot of value to the site. A lot of migratory birds will use sort of conifer plantations for shelter in the winter. These past few days and the storms we've experienced, birds will be looking to find as much cover as possible. So structure is sometimes just as valuable as what native species can provide when it comes to habitat. As well as that, we've got various hedgerows across the estate. So Andy had that lovely map with the yellow lines and the red lines. So a variety of different hedgerows, some with lovely veteran trees in, 300 years old or even more. And every now and again, we get veteran trees just in the middle of sort of agricultural fields. So really nice sort of woodland on the site. A lot of what we will manage for is grassland. So the nature reserve, if you've ever been, we're managing as a sort of lowland meadow, and they're doing a really good job of that, of increasing the diversity of the vegetation that we've got there. And that is going to benefit so many different species. And then just to the east of that, a site that's come under our management a little bit more recently is what we call the MOD land. So it used to belong to the Ministry of Defence. Less diverse at the moment, but hopefully with some improved management, we're going to reverse that. Towards the north of the site, so as you sort of head along the canal, you start to get to the wetter areas of the Chester Zoo estate. So we've got rush pasture. We've even got a little bit of sort of wetland woodland as well, or sort of alder and willow carr, as we call it. And really, we have generic wetland across the site. So we have things like ponds, which are really great open water habitats, ditches within the reed bed, again, open water. But some of the grasslands, some of the woodland is just considered wetland. And we actually have a lot of what we would call flooding on the site, where there's water above the water table for quite a long time throughout the year. And this is really beneficial for many things that we want to encourage. So just a few pretty pictures to take a look at. We've got some reed bed here. So you can see we've got an open ditch of water here, but reed bed is just dominated by common reed. So usually 90% more sort of reed bed or common reed in a reed bed. And this is what it looks like. Woodland. So needless to say, woodland is really beneficial. It provides great structure to a habitat and lots of places for things to take cover from weather, but predators as well. And a lot of ground flora actually needs sort of dappled shade or complete shade and really doesn't do too well throughout the year unless it has that. Grassland, we're looking to encourage as much diversity of sort of flowering species as possible. Like I say, if you ever get the chance to go to the nature reserve, it's really a nice showcase of what can be done with ex-agricultural land, and the guys here have done an excellent job with creating that nature reserve. And this is just the most picture perfect pond I've ever seen. Great wetland areas here, network of ponds that benefit great crested newts, but other amphibians as well, and lots of invertebrates as well. So lovely ponds with open water, marginal vegetation, and very close to good terrestrial habitat as well. So we've got nice hedgerow in the back there, which is connected to the woodland. So nice connective habitat. So back to this map, we've had a look at what habitat we do have. What can we improve? You know, what have we got? What can we do to make it better? Well, we can maybe improve our grassland management. What we really want to do is introduce a natural style of management. We want to restore ecological processes to be as natural as possible. One thing we would like to do is a grazing feasibility report. It might be a nice idea to introduce grazing herds to some of these plots of land, and they will be able to manage that site for us. But we do need to take a look into the feasibility of that before we just willy-nilly introduce cattle. Until then, we will be cutting most of the grass mechanically, annually, or perhaps even 2 or 3 times a year if needs be. And we do that by bringing on quite large machinery, cutting it, and then removing what we've cut to reduce the nutrient level. Pond management on site. We will be making assessment of all the ponds we do have. That will be a big chunk of work for me to do over the next few months. And out of that assessment, we will take a look at renovating some of the ponds that we perhaps want to keep. So over time, a lot of ponds will succumb to succession, where a lot of vegetation builds up, a lot of detritus at the bottom of the pond will build up, and they will succeed into scrub. And then eventually, if you leave it long enough, they tend to succeed into woodland. So we can renovate ponds to keep them open, because in a place like this, we just cannot allow sort of natural processes to take control. Ponds generally are made by flooding, and we don't allow our river systems to flood in the same way that they used to thousands of years ago. And we have actually renovated about 3 ponds down here on the estate already. And I've got a couple of photographs just to show you in the next few slides. So I'll go into more detail on that then. As well as that, we'd like to map the reed bed. Again, reed bed will succumb to succession if we let it. It will dry out the area. That will allow things like bramble and nettles to seed, and it will just lose all its reed bed function. So by mapping the reed bed, we will be able to create management plans to better implement management over the next few years, and we will be able to track the age of the reed bed so that we can cut rotationally and sort of manage any succession that's occurred as time goes on. And then finally, hedge laying. So all across the site, there's no specific hedges, but we want to retain the connectivity that the hedgerows provide. And the best way of doing that is by actually laying hedge that has grown too leggy. So as it grows tall and resembles trees more than hedges, you tend to get a less diverse sort of mid-level because it doesn't allow light in. There's no vegetative growth, so it doesn't provide cover for things that want to use it from getting from one place to another. So lots of laying hedge on site over the next year. And here's just a good, nice picture of the meadow. You can see we're working with quite large areas of land. It's just not feasible to go in and cut it, you know, using hand tools or even just without using big machinery or using sort of grazers. So annual meadow cuts, very much all about bringing on a big tractor and cutting them on an annual basis and then removing anything that you've cut. And by reducing that nutrient level, we allow things to grow that otherwise wouldn't be able to compete with things that like to grow on high nutrient soil. Hedge laying, this is a picture, not on Chester Zoo, unfortunately, but this is a picture of a very newly laid hedge. So you can cut it very, very carefully right at the very base. And then you can lay it and weave it in amongst sort of vertical posts. And then that'll create that really nice bushy growth that we like to see in our hedgerows. And it's a really sustainable way of making sure your hedgerows last as long as possible. And it's far better than allowing your hedges to just grow, then removing them and replanting them. So big thumbs up to hedge laying. And here's a picture of the pond before we renovated it. So you can just about see a little bit of water here. And this is what happens very naturally to ponds over time. There's a buildup of vegetation and they just lose all the open water that provides benefits for the species that need it. And this is what it looks like afterwards. Looks a little bit messy at the moment, but you wait until spring and summer and everything will grow back. And things like great crested newt are really going to use that open water far more effectively. This one was actually renovated specifically for the lesser silver water beetle, a sort of naturally scarce species that does have a stronghold here in Chester. And we've actually tried to create the banks as muddy as possible, which their larvae will use to develop in. And finally, what can we create? What sort of new habitat can we create on the site? As Andy highlighted, we have a lot of ponds and we want to increase the extent of that network for the species that use them. And towards the north end of the site, we are lacking ponds. So by creating a really big pond right at the top here, we're going to improve that sort of wetland habitat on the site. And then just beneath it as well, we would like to plant a traditional orchard. So this is a really ambitious project and one that has a really excellent long-term goal. So traditionally managed orchards take very, very long periods of time to actually establish, so, 30, 40 years before the trees start providing their full benefits to the species that use them. So they're really held up as some of the best habitats for invertebrates that use deadwood, and it takes a long time for those trees to grow and to produce deadwood that would be beneficial. So we will be planting new trees, around 95 new trees, and we'll be managing those as a traditionally managed sort of orchard up here just south of the new pond that's going in. We'd like a little bit more open water on the site. So in the reed beds, we would like to reprofile the ditches to make sure that they do hold open water throughout the year, and that the reed isn't becoming too explosive in its growth and really reducing the amount of open water that's available. And in the wet sort of grassland areas, the rush pasture, we do find a lot of migratory birds such as snipe there, and we'd like to increase the open water by digging some scrapes. So literally we take a big digger and we scrape away some of the vegetation. That creates a nice shallow ditch, and waders will use it for feeding. And quite often scrapes are good for providing cover from prevailing winds for birds to sort of hunker behind. But all in all, it does just sort of increase the open water on the site. Right, and this is my last slide. I want to just talk about what we're doing here on Chester Zoo as part of the Nature Recovery Corridor. And it's all about linking in, okay? Linking in for the wildlife. So this corridor that they can use to move throughout the landscape. And I'm really showing off my Photoshop skills here. But here's the land I've just outlined. So this is Chester Zoo here, the Chester Zoo estate. But we're linking to places like the Countess of Chester Country Park, just down here, the Dale, just here. It's not just about the wildlife, it's about the communities as well. So by working with these partners, we can make sure that our goals align, that we're working towards the same thing. And we're really providing each other the resources that one another needs, the expertise that maybe we have that we can offer to other people, and that they have and that they can offer to us as well. And then just northeast of us is the Gowie Wetlands, an excellent site managed by the Wildlife Trusts, which would be really beneficial to link to. But modern conservation is a difficult beast to grapple with. We've got things like motorways that really provide very difficult barriers, physical and otherwise, to overcome. So we need to think about these sort of things when we're sort of managing the habitat on our site, but always with the view of, well, what are we linking it to? What are we connecting it to? And that's very much the aim of the Nature Recovery Corridor is linking wildlife and communities together. Right, I will pass you over to Joe. Thank you for listening.
Hi everyone, my name is Joe. I'm the ecologist working on the Nature Recovery project at the zoo. Thanks to Helen, Andy and Ben for introducing the project, talking about the work we already do and giving the site a bit of context. I'm just going to be going through the specific surveys we're going to do this year in the wider corridor and give a bit of explanation as to the what and the why. So we've started on some surveys in the corridor already, but the full list of surveys we're planning this year are, we've got some desktop studies to do, phase 1 and MVC vegetation and classification work. We've got hedgerow surveys, breeding and wintering birds, great crested newts, battery resuitability, activity strand sex and static monitoring, dragonfly, butterflies and bees, reptiles, harvest mouse and fungi. So to start with, before any of the surveys are underway, I've been carrying out some desktop investigation. I've been looking at some of the older Ordnance Survey maps and the Cheshire Tithe maps to get an idea of what the historical landscape of the zoo estate looks like. I'm doing this to try and work out the historic uses of the different areas of the site in the hope that we can find areas that have avoided some of the more intensive farming practices and work out the historical uses of the land and see if we can restore any of them. I'm also looking at older hedgerows, as these features can act as things like seed banks for rarer species and commuting lines for routes of bats and birds and important food sources for invertebrates. As you can see the map, this shows the northern end of the site. Many of the current field boundaries match the historical hedgerows present in the map on the left from 1850, which means that some of these boundaries could potentially be really old relic hedgerows, which is really interesting and important for a lot of different species. Once we've finished the desktop studies, we can start investigating the actual site and see how it matches up to what we think might be there and how everything fits together. During the winter months, everything's hibernating, so we can't survey much yet. So at the moment, we're just carrying out some hedgerow and veteran tree surveys. These can be done throughout most of the year, and we've already found some quite interesting stuff on site. So this is a woodland, this is called Bluebell Wood. It's a broadleaf woodland in the middle of the site. So the middle bit has been recently planted in the last 30 years. and isn't on the historical map you can see on the left, but some of the areas outside have things like bluebell and lesser celandine, which are ancient woodland indicators. So it's a bit of a weird puzzle. And what we've done is, through a combination of looking at these maps and ground truthing what we find, what it actually is that it is planted woodland in the middle, but the presence of bluebells and celandine is just around the edges, which means the hedgerows present on site are potentially really, really old. We've confirmed this. You can see on the bottom, that's hawthorn that's had evidence that it's historically been laid. And then there's a hedgerow along the top, you can see, that's got a bank associated with the hedgerow, which is an old style of hedgerow, which means they're potentially of quite significant age and therefore potentially quite important. So that's happening. And then the other surveys we've got breeding birds and wintering birds. We've just finished our February wintering bird survey literally today. And so there's been bird surveys carried out on the nature reserve for the last few years, and we're now extending our survey to cover the nature reserve again and the wider corridor on site. So winter bird surveys, birds such as fieldfare and redwings are winter migrants to Britain and use like our grassy car parks to feed in. And they're also, wintering bird surveys are good because birds tend to aggregate. And you can see them a bit easier, and they're also feeding a lot more because it's cold. And then in March, we're going to start carrying out our breeding bird surveys. We'll be following the methodology set out in the British Trust for Ornithology Common Bird Census Note. We're going to be doing 10 visits, 8 of them starting about an hour after sunrise and 2 carried out in the evening. This will help us. So the aim of these is to establish a baseline of the bird assemblage on site, which means that we can work out what's there now and what management plan is going to be best for maintaining and improving the habitat of birds on site. In terms of ponds and great crested newts, as part of the licensing work and upcoming habitat management plans for ponds in the winter that Ben will be taking care of, we'll be continuing the annual monitoring of breeding newts in the ponds. And this will just involve wandering around the ponds with torches and counting what we find. Next up is bats. I haven't got cute pictures of bats, but I do have cool trees. Some level of bat survey has been carried out in the Causey area for the last few years. We've got a couple of roosts on site, but we're not sure how they use the wider zoo estate area. So the plan is this year to do a couple more surveys and work out how the bats are using the wider site. So the main thing we've done so far is slowly working my way around site to do bat tree roost potential surveys. So these trees are high potential to carry bat roosts. So bats like rotting wood in trees, so they climb in because it's warm and dry. Sometimes they hibernate there as well. Historically, their report from 2000 noticed there was a nocturnal roost in a tree just north of the Jaguar enclosure. So hopefully they'll be using other trees around the site as well. Once it gets a bit warmer and bats start using the trees more regularly, we're going to resurvey the trees that we found and check them with endoscopes to see if anything's living in them. Then from April, we're going to start doing monthly activity transects and passive acoustic monitoring. The activity transects are going to start at sunset. We'll walk a predetermined route that includes important features for bats, such as hedgerows and open fields, of which there are a lot on the site. These carry on for about 2 hours, and we'll just wander around and see what we can hear, and we'll record things like whether bats are commuting or foraging and how they're using the site. At the same time, we're going to be deploying some passive acoustic monitoring devices that will stay out for about a week and record everything they hear overnight. We'll then bring those in, analyse them, and record and work out what bats it's recorded throughout the night. And so this combination will give us a way of capturing both how many bats we have on the site in terms of species and how they're using the site. We're also, in August, we're going to be doing the Bat Conservation Trust or Benton's count on the canal. So this begins about 40 minutes after sunset and takes about an hour, and we count the number of Benton's bat passes for 4 minutes at 10 stopping points along the waterway, just to see how the Benton's bats that we've got in the area are using the site. Next is invertebrate surveys. The nature reserve has been really thoroughly surveyed for invertebrates over the last couple of years, but the wider site's a bit lacking in records. This tends to be because invertebrates are under surveyed because they can be quite difficult. They're difficult to find, they're difficult to identify, and that level of knowledge is often not as common. So I'm new to surveying inverts, so I'm going to be working with Record this year to improve my skills and go out with them, and then hopefully I can take over the butterfly, dragonfly and bee, wasp and hoverfly surveys over the summer. So they're nicely carried out on lovely warm sunny days, start about 10 AM and just go for a wander and see what you can find. So it's making sure you're looking at all the habitats, all these different things used, so wet ponds and ditches for dragonflies, open fields and woodland for butterflies, and then just a wide range of basking areas and stuff for everything we can find. And reptile surveys. So there is a lack of records within Cheshire for reptiles, which is a shame. But, you know, it's likely because quite a lot of the land is intensively farmed, which is not particularly suitable area for reptiles. However, some of the land on our site, because we're not intensively farming it, does provide a lot nicer and more suitable habitat for them. They like quite a nice 3D sort of tussocky structure in the grass. And our site could potentially be suitable for things like common lizards, slow worms and grass snakes. We are going to carry out a survey this year, because at least we can work out whether they're, you know, we can definitely say they're not there. Well, you can't ever definitely say they're not there. You can either find them or we can do likely absence. And then we'll just see what we find, really. And then last but not least, we're doing some harvest mice surveys and some ad hoc fungi surveys. So about 20 years ago, Chester Zoo released a population of harvest mice into 2 fields in the Northwest Nature Reserve. This population was monitored for a number of years, but there haven't been any confirmed sightings of mice since 2012. Recently, a barn owl pellet was found in the nature reserve, and when it was dissected, one of our scientists found a harvest mice skull, which triggered us to do a bit more investigation, restart the surveys. And on starting these surveys, we found the population that we released is still there, and it's also spreading north along the canal, which is really exciting. So this year, in autumn, we're going to be doing further nest surveys. So once the mice have left the nest, we'll be hand searching through the long grass to try and find these nests, which they just look like little woven together tennis balls. So they weave the nest out of the grass, and we'll either have a bigger nest with babies or they'll just have individual nests. So we'll be hand searching for them. And then potentially, if we manage it, we might also do some trapping, but they're a bit of a pain to trap because they're so small. You have to exclude everything else, and it can be a bit awkward at times. And in terms of fungi, we aren't specifically doing fungi surveys, but I have a bit of experience in identifying fungi. So I've already found some wax caps on site, which are quite good indicators of decent grassland. So I'm going to be keeping a further eye out for them. Once it gets into sort of late summer, autumn time, we'll also be looking in woodlands and just keeping an eye out for good indicator species of things like good grassland and old woodland, and just seeing what we find. And from a non-survey point of view, what myself and Ben are also doing is doing some community engagement. So we've done a couple of site visits so far with local things like local community groups, local wildlife groups, village halls and things like that. And we're sort of providing technical advice on providing better habitat for wildlife. And I've met with a couple of groups to provide some information, and I'm also working with our community engagement officers to provide sort of specific technical training. So that's the bulk of the work I'll be doing next year. I'm sure there'll be other fun stuff that I'll get involved in, and then hopefully this time next year we can give a lovely breakdown of what we found this year. And I think I'm passing to Chloe now.
Okay, thanks very much, Jo. Okay, hello everybody. My name is Chloe Aldridge and I work for Records. I'm the monitoring officer there, and we work with Chester Zoo, my other colleagues as well, in order to deliver the monitoring on the nature reserve. And we've also done some work on the adjacent land this year, and I'm going to do a bit of a whistle-stop tour through some of the things that we've been finding. So first of all, concentrating on the nature reserve, I put this slide on really with a number of different pictures, because I thought really key to what we've discovered this year is that the different habitats on the reserve are really key to the number of species that we're finding. And this on the left-hand side, this is a field, an old agricultural field that has been on a journey, and what a journey. It has been transformed into this wildflower meadow that you can see in front of you. There are also ponds on the site. There are wet meadows with various different stands of vegetation, as well as reed beds, which you can't see in this picture here, and also young woodland at the front of the nature reserve. And really, this is the real strength of the nature reserve, in that it has a number of different habitats on it, and that is providing space for all the species that we found. And this year, actually, we found over 1,200 species. Now, there is a reason that we found so many this year. Usually, in a year's monitoring, we're finding more like, it's more like 300 really. So the numbers are particularly high this year, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. But just to start off, 75, nearly 3/4 of those were actually insects, and a good proportion of those also were flies. Now, something very impressive was we always look at how many we found that haven't been recorded on the reserve before. And this year, 658 of those species were previously unrecorded on this particular site. And that doesn't mean that they weren't there before because we haven't recorded them. It's partly because we've been recording groups that haven't been recorded before, but it's also because the reserve is really providing a lot of different habitats in order to give space for all of those species. And we're very happy to say that 76 of those do actually have conservation status. Oops, hang on this. Okay. Okay, so really at the base of our surveys is the survey on the main meadow. And this is a very important one because the main meadow is this field that has been transformed, and it really is the basis of a lot of the biodiversity on this particular part of the site. And what we do really is just over a couple of days each summer, we, if you like, we kind of measure the health of the meadow by doing this particular survey method with the help of volunteers. And we look really for how well the meadow is doing and how the management on it either should stay the same or to change. And on the left over here, you can see a couple of what we call positive indicator species. This means species of plants which are desirable to have in this situation, such as betony and such as lady's bedstraw. These are ones that will disappear if you start to get really enriched soil and all the vigorous growth of docks and nettles, things like that. These things like this will suffer. But if these are doing well, along with some of the fine grasses, then we know that the meadow is in good health. And I've put a very simple graph here, which is showing percentages actually in which the different types of plants occur. And at the top, this green line here shows our positive indicator species. And it's good news really, because in the results, we can really see that those are dominating, having started off as a very low proportion of what was present on the meadow in 27 when the meadow was first created. It's now the dominant category of plants, if you like, with the negative indicators the least dominant. Now, the negative indicators, just to say, they're not things that we don't want there. The negative gives the wrong impression really, but they're the ones that we don't want to be in such large numbers that they start to dominate what is there. So there's nothing which is really negative in itself. There are just some things that we don't want to be present at a very high percentage. And so really this shows that the management of the meadow is at the moment going very well. Now on the right hand side here, you can see part of the wet meadows, and this little part in my mind, when I arrived here during my surveys, I would think of this as the water mint nectar bar. And that was because it was just a wonderful place, absolutely full of butterflies, hoverflies, all sorts of invertebrates, a really special place. And one of the surveys that was done this year was a full site plant list by an ecologist and a team of wonderful volunteers who we persuaded to come and help us. And they found nearly 200 species across the site of plants. And one really nice thing was on this part of the wet meadows, which hasn't been surveyed for plants before, 80 species were found of plants. And actually it was, you know, there are probably many more there actually, but it was a really good assemblage of plants, and also of really interesting plants, and which will be very good for a number of different invertebrates, particularly invertebrates which are specialist on that type of habitat. But also from my point of view, I could see just walking through it, it was just providing space and food for a vast number of species. Okay, so the invertebrate surveys that we carry out. So in the 5th year of recording, we really are beginning to get a very good idea of what is happening with the invertebrates. And just to give you some headlines from this, really, the bee, wasp and hoverfly surveys, what we've seen is actually a big increase in the numbers of species that we're recording from the first year when we started this one. We're seeing a lot of things which are present in very low numbers, and then some species which are present in very large numbers. The one on the left that you can see here, this is actually a very small flower here, and this bee is probably no bigger than your thumbnail. It's called a banded furrow bee, and this is a tiny little one which I found 3 different species of this genus of bee on the reserve, which was really nice. Now, the butterflies, over 5 years, you can begin to track the ups and downs of them. The number of species has increased and the number of species is holding steady. They're doing well. However, last year, as any of you who are interested in butterflies and look at them yourselves will know, butterflies generally didn't do well nationally. And that was partly because, I don't know if you remember, there was that really horrible wet and cold spring. And that seems to have really affected them during the year. So species such as meadow brown did really badly, and we saw a big drop in numbers. However, overall, there was actually an increase in some of the species, and all of the species have actually either increased or the numbers have held steady since we started surveying them in 2017. The dragonflies, similarly, we're seeing a similar number of species. It was really nice too, though, to see that they were spreading out across the different ponds. So where previously we had recorded some of the species in just, 1 or 2 of the wet ditches or the ponds, we're now recording them really right across the site. And there was evidence of breeding in nearly all of those water bodies. One of the new surveys that was carried out this year was on moths, and we did moth trapping with a team of volunteers. And a really nice thing about doing a new survey is you find just loads of species that you haven't found before. So 117 of these were new for the reserve, but this is probably really from the little bit of expert help that we had, really the tip of the iceberg of what could be down there. A number of those species depend on woodland, or they depend on grassland. We didn't really explore the wetter areas of the reserve, which are probably a good resource of a number of different species. It was also nice to find that 13 of those do have conservation status, among them this one, the giant water veneer. Now, this was only actually recorded in Cheshire for the first time last year, and this one is nationally scarce. Our bird surveys, this was the 5th year of our bird surveys, it was great to see that not only were the number of species that we were recording still increasing, but we were doing the kind of breeding bird survey that Jo was talking about that she's going to be doing this summer. And for the 5th year, we have seen really quite a large increase in the number of birds which are breeding on the reserve and setting up territories and raising chicks. And I'm glad to say that 26 of these birds are birds of conservation concern. And one of the species that we saw nesting for the first time on the reserve this year was the Chetty's warbler. This was down on the reedbeds. So in previous years, we have had records of this bird in previous years. And last year, actually, we had records in every single month of this bird singing on the reserve. But this is the first year when we've had them actual records of nesting, and there were 5 nesting pairs. Now, this is not an uncommon bird. This is a bird that has been spreading up really quite rapidly through the country. And it's an illustration really of, that we're trying to provide space for wildlife, and not just those which are specifically of conservation concern, but also for species which need to find the habitat that they need in order to get what they need when they arrive. Now, we've been keeping an eye on mammals as well during the year, and with the camera trapping and with Mastellas, we've been keeping a watching eye on what is actually using the reserve. And one of those species is a weasel, and really I just wanted to show you this absolutely wonderful picture that one of our really prolific recorders provided us for. This was down actually by the bird hide one morning when he was down there. Now, one of the really huge surveys that happened on the reserve this year was a fly and true bug survey, and we were very lucky that Phil Brighton, the county recorder for DEFRA, which is flies, came down onto the reserve every 2 weeks during the season, did a vast amount of surveying and sorting of the results, and came up with this really quite amazing result of 408 fly species. And I can't even begin to tell you all the exciting things really that he found from there, all the exciting statistics. I'm really happy to say that he's going to be doing a talk about just his survey later on in the summer, I think in July, but keep an eye out for when it is. And this really produced some amazing results, including 9 flies which are new for Cheshire. Also of particular interest that a lot of flies he found, although there were a lot that are kind of generalists across different habitats, there were nearly half of them were actually specialists in one type of the habitats that he was surveying on the reserve. And it just shows the importance really of supplying those particular habitats. And at the bottom I've put a picture of one of the nationally scarce flies that he found. And really it helps to illustrate that the reserve is now really quite an important local place for biodiversity. Partly, because we know a lot about it, because it's been really well surveyed now, but also because there are really a lot of species which are as a conservation concern, or other species which we're just providing space and resources for. So that was really nice to add that to our knowledge about the reserve. Now, I think the others have mentioned this little parcel of land next door to the reserve. So here we have the reserve, and next door to it is this former MOD land. And Record was asked to go on there this year and to really find some baseline information about what is happening there. And Ben mentioned a little bit about it, but we asked somebody to come on and do a national vegetation classification, so a really detailed look at the communities of plants there, and found some very interesting results. It's not particularly species rich at the moment as a whole, but it's had a very interesting history, and it hasn't been heavily managed. It has been grazed in the past, but it hasn't, got all the input the standard piece of agricultural lands might have done really for decades. And its starting point is very, very different to the reserve next door. It was nice to find an area up in this part of this parcel of land, which really is quite species rich. And it's this part here, and it was covered in common orchids, and also a number of meadow grasses and meadow flowers as well. We did also ask Northwest Invertebrates, the Tuniptera Trust, who are entomologists, regional entomologists, to come and do some recording. And Records also ran some recording days there and picked up a lot of records to also get a baseline idea of what was happening on that piece of land and further along the canal corridor. And on the MOD land, we recorded 452 species in all. And I did a survey over 3 months, went on there 5 times, and found a number of bees, wasps and hoverflies. And it was really nice to see the different habitats, including features like this old rotting tree trunk, which turned out to be absolutely alive with tiny little black wasps, which are predatory on all sorts of grassland invertebrates, and they're catching them, coming back to the log. And to be honest, you could just sit here and watch them doing that bit of work and stocking their nests, their larvae, eat these. Another nice hoverfly we found was the hornet mimic hoverfly, sometimes just called a hornet hoverfly, and you can see why it is. The pictures, you know, it's a great picture, but a little bit disappointing, and it doesn't show the size of these things. They really could, you know, when you just see them, they could be mistaken for hornets. They're a very impressive beast indeed. Okay, another piece of work that some volunteers, 3 volunteers helped us with, was doing some bird surveys further up the canal corridor, and we're very grateful to them for all of the species that they helped identify that were using that piece of land, including some very intensive surveys on this southern part where we were able to actually carry out some territory mapping. And here is just an example with the blackcaps, one of the 18 bird species which were found to have breeding territories on this piece of land. And you can see here the process we had to go through of getting all of these records mapped, and then, you know, poring over the maps really and deciding what was actually going on the ground, and if we could identify where a bird would be breeding. Now, we got this land also mapped with habitat surveys, and found a total of 333 species in all on this piece of land during the season. And it was nice right furthest away from the reserve that you could get on this piece of land, so at least a kilometre away, to find the Essex skipper, which turned up for the first time on the reserve last year. And this year we found over a kilometre away at the top of that little part of the canal corridor. So that's just to give you really a very brief overview of what we've been doing there this year. And I'm just going to hand back now to Helen.
Thank you for that, Chloe. Hopefully that gives you a really good overview, everybody, of everything we've got going on, basically, which you can see is a huge amount across the estate. We are keen for people to get involved. So if you want to get involved in some of that, the best way is to get in touch with Record. And if you've got either particular skills you'd like to lend in terms of the survey work, then get in touch. Or if you're just really interested in getting involved and come along to any surveys, then yeah, drop everybody a line.